Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive.
I am.
So we're switching things up a bit today. This deep dive is going to be a little different.
How so?
Well, instead of having a bunch of different articles and news stories to sift through, we're going to be focusing on just one single source.
Oh, interesting. What is it?
It's a transcript
Mm.
of a televised interview with a newly discovered aquatic species.
Wow. Okay. What are they called?
They're called the abreuvoir. It's like we're right there in the studio watching this whole thing unfold live.
That's pretty cool. It must be a pretty bizarre interview.
Yeah, it is. It's bizarre, but it's also more than that. It gets into some really deep stuff,
Like what?
like family and societal expectations, and what it even means to succeed in life. Things that are relevant to all of us.
Okay. Yeah, I'm starting to see where we're going with this.
So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Sounds good.
Right from the start, you can feel this tension in the room. I mean, you got Don Fontaine, the interviewer, and he's trying to keep things light, like his usual TV personality.
Right.
But you can tell that his guest, Bucket, is not comfortable at all.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a pretty alien environment for her, all those bright lights and cameras.
Exactly. It makes you think about the power dynamics of first contact situations.
Totally.
And then there's just her physical appearance.
Oh, yeah.
What?
She has this silver seaweed-like hair
Oh,
and these fathomless eyes.
the fathomless eyes.
Yeah, it's how they describe them in the transcript. I mean, she looks nothing like what we expect an intelligent being to look like.
Huh. Makes you wonder, what does intelligence really look like? Do we even have the capacity to recognize intelligence if it's not like ours?
And those 6-inch talons, I can't imagine the people watching at home felt very comfortable seeing those.
It's a powerful image, isn't it?
Ugh.
A reminder that while we might share some basic emotions with them, they've clearly evolved on a totally different path. Yeah, their strength and resilience is clearly for a world that we could barely even fathom.
Pun intended.
Maybe. Anyway, there's also this language barrier.
Ah, right. So how are they communicating with her?
It's not really clear, but Bucket keeps asking, what is purposing of this?
Yeah, that makes sense. She's probably never experienced anything like a televised interview before.
Exactly. It must be incredibly hard to try and explain something like that to someone with no point of reference.
Totally. It makes you think about how we approach communication, not just with alien species, but even with each other. Like, how often are we misinterpreting each other because we all come to the conversation with different assumptions?
That's a great point. Anyway, as the interview goes on, we start to learn more about them, particularly their reproductive cycle.
Okay, what about it?
Well, so the females lay a ton of eggs, but only once in their entire life.
Huh. And I guess that makes sense for an aquatic environment, but it also sounds kind of rough.
It does. I mean, there's a high mortality rate for the offspring. It just seems like a really brutal life.
It does sound like there's a lot of pressure on them to reproduce and protect their nests.
Oh, yeah. And that pressure isn't just biological. It's like built into their whole society. They even have this thing called the cérémonie d'adultes.
What's that?
Think of it like a coming-of-age ceremony, where young abreuvoirs leave their family nest to find a mate and start their own nests.
Okay, so kind of like graduating high school or something?
Yeah, but with way higher stakes.
Mm.
Because if they fail to mate, they are basically outcasts.
Oh, wow. So where does Bucket fit into all of this?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. She's clearly very anxious about finding a mate, and she even mentions that she had a sister who died after she failed to mate.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. But it also shows just how deeply rooted this whole offspring thing is to them.
I see what you mean.
And get this, they don't even get names until after they've nested successfully.
Seriously. So their entire identity is tied to reproduction.
It seems like it. And you can tell all of this is weighing heavily on Bucket. But it's actually her willingness to talk about all of this, her vulnerability, that lets us get a look into what they're really like.
Yeah, she's really opening up a window into their world and their psyche.
Exactly. And I think it's this vulnerability that starts to change the whole tone of the interview.
Okay, I'm interested to hear more about that.
I'll have to save that for the next part of our dive, though.
All right, sounds good.
It's fascinating how Bucket kind of takes control of the interview by opening up like that.
Yeah, it becomes less about the spectacle of this new species, and it becomes more about understanding her emotional world and what she's going through.
And she's clearly carrying a lot. I mean, the weight of her entire society is on her shoulders, right?
Right, but it also makes you wonder, do all abreuvoirs feel this way? Or is it possible that there's more individual variation than we realize?
That's a really good point. We are only seeing a tiny snapshot of their culture after all.
Yeah, just one herbivore's perspective.
But even so, her story gives us so much to think about. I mean, the pressure to mate and reproduce is so intense for them. It's like their whole social structure is based on it.
Yeah, it's almost like a biological determinism. Like, our biology dictates our role in society, which is a pretty heavy concept.
It is, and we see that play out in all kinds of ways in human societies too.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's this pivotal moment.
Oh, what is it?
Don Fontaine, the interviewer, seems to realize that he's caused Bucket a lot of distress, so he offers to end the interview.
Okay.
But get this, she insists on continuing.
Oh, wow. Why do you think she does that?
It seems like she really wants to connect, like to be understood, even by being so different from her.
Maybe she sees it as a way to share her story and just get it off her chest.
It's like she's saying, hey, my world is different, but I still feel these emotions. It's very human, you know?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's that universal need to connect with others, to know that you're not alone.
Exactly. And then she reveals something that I thought was really poignant.
What's that?
She's worried that her scales aren't as reflective as the other females, and she's insecure about it.
That's kind of sad. It's like even a giant sea creature with 6-inch talons can feel insecure about their appearance.
Right. It's proof that some anxieties are just universal. It doesn't matter what species you are.
It's like we're all just trying to fit in and find our place in the world.
And then there's this beautiful moment where Don Fontaine tries to comfort her. He tells her that her scales are beautiful and that he can see his reflection in them.
Oh, come on. You're going to make me cry.
I know, right? And what's amazing is that Bucket actually laughs for the first time in the whole interview. It's like this simple act of kindness just totally breaks through.
It's the power of human connection, even in the most bizarre circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And after that, Bucket actually expresses gratitude for the opportunity to share her feelings. She says that just saying it out loud has helped her feel better.
That's amazing. It's proof that sometimes just acknowledging our feelings can help.
Right. And it challenges how we think about the abreuvoir, too. Because we see them as driven by biology. But here's Bucket, expressing self-doubt and finding relief in expressing her feelings.
It's a side of them we haven't seen before.
And to top it all off, Don Fontaine then announces that they're going to start figuring out how to return Bucket to the sea.
What? Wow, okay, so what happens next?
Well, that's the cliffhanger. The transcript doesn't tell us what happens when she goes back.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder, what awaits her? How will she reintegrate?
And how has this whole experience changed her?
Exactly. So many questions. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It doesn't have easy answers.
Right. It's more about exploring these complex themes and ideas.
Okay, so back to Bucket and this crazy interview. I mean, wow, what a ride.
Right. So many twists and turns.
We've seen cultures clash, communication breakdowns, and then this totally unexpected emotional connection between Bucket and Don Fontaine. But now they're going to try to return her to the sea.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. I mean, will she even be able to fit back into her own society?
Who knows, right? She might not even want to go back after all of this.
That's true. Imagine sharing your deepest fears with someone, forming a bond, and then suddenly it's over.
I know. It's got to be tough. And the transcript doesn't really say how she reacts to the news, but I can only imagine it's a lot of mixed emotions.
Definitely. Relief, apprehension, maybe even a bit of sadness.
Yeah, for sure. It makes you think about how even a short encounter can have a huge impact on someone.
And not just on an individual level. It makes you wonder how exposure to a completely different culture changes us as a species.
That is a good question. I mean, does it open our minds to new possibilities?
Yeah.
Or do we just end up clinging even tighter to our own beliefs?
It's something to think about, right? Do we really seek out different perspectives? Or do we just stay in our comfort zones?
I think this whole interview is a good reminder that real growth happens when we push ourselves outside of those comfort zones.
Absolutely. It's in those moments of uncertainty when we're faced with things we don't understand that we really learn and evolve.
And it's not just about individual growth either. It's about how we as humans approach the unknown. How do we stay curious, but also respect other beings, especially ones as different as the abreuvoir?
It's a question we struggled with forever. Like, how do we learn without exploiting? How do we balance our desire for knowledge with our ethical responsibilities?
It's a tough one. And honestly, this interview doesn't make it any easier to answer. Is sending Bucket back to the sea the right thing to do? Are we respecting her autonomy or just putting her at risk?
I don't know. There's no easy answer. And maybe that's the point. We have to acknowledge that our actions can have unintended consequences.
I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not about finding the right answer. It's about wrestling with all of these complicated issues.
It's about understanding that the universe is full of mysteries and that sometimes asking the right questions is more important than having all the answers.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have one final thought for everyone listening. If you could ask Bucket one question before she goes back to the sea, what would it be? What would you want to know? What message would you want to give her? Until next time, keep diving deep.